5 years ago, her name was on every billboard in Times Square. Tonight, she's locked in the bathroom of a luxury hotel, mascara smudging, trembling as she dials a number no longer belongs to anyone alive. Behind the red velvet door, America's most powerful men are waiting to buy her like a commodity. Her manager has already sold her. Her career is dead. And she has only 30 seconds before they break down the door. Press like and comment the city you're viewing right now, so I know how far this story has progressed. Don't leave the screen, because what happens next will change everything. The lipstick was the wrong shade. Selene Vale stood in front of the bathroom mirror of the Merrow Crown Hotel's 40th floor and understood, with the particular clarity that comes only in moments of total dread, that the color didn't matter. Nothing about her appearance mattered. What mattered was the lock on the stall door, which was a standard hotel lock, and therefore not the kind of barrier that stopped men who had already bought and paid for everything in this building, including the security cameras and the staff downstairs who pretended not to see anything. She pressed the lipstick against her lower lip anyway. Old habit, the kind that survives catastrophe because the body needs something to do when the mind has gone white with panic. She looked terrible. She knew it. The mirror in the VIP bathroom was the honest kind. Recessed lighting designed to be flattering, but flattery required a canvas that wasn't already eroded. Selene's face had been through 18 months of slow-motion collapse. The cheekbones were still there, still the ones that used to make photographers argue over angles, but beneath them the skin was pale and drawn in a way that photographs couldn't fix anymore. Her eyes, wide, dark, once described in a Rolling Stone profile as uncommonly alive, were now just frightened. Mascara had tracked 2 lines down her left cheek. She wiped at one with her thumb and smeared it worse. Outside, the rain was hammering the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Merrow Crown's upper suites. 40 stories below, the city moved through its wet Friday night without any awareness that the woman its pop radio stations had played on loop for 3 years was standing in a hotel bathroom trying not to hyperventilate. She had not wanted to come tonight. She had told Corbin she was sick, and Corbin had said, in the particular flat voice he used when he was done having conversations, that she would attend or she would be in default on the remainder of her contract, which would expose her to the full weight of the recoupment clause. Approximately $4 million she did not have, and would not have in this lifetime. Selene had stood in the hallway of her leased apartment, phone pressed to her ear, stomach tight, and said nothing for a long moment. "What kind of event is it?" she had asked. "Private entertainment. High-end clientele. They want a name they recognize." "What does that mean, Corbin? What does it mean exactly?" "It means you show up, you're charming, you let them take photos. That's it." She had known it was not it. She had known since the last 2 events, the one in Miami that she'd fled after an hour when she caught the look exchanged between 2 men in a private suite, and the one in Chicago where another woman, someone she vaguely recognized from a modeling campaign, had grabbed her wrist in the corridor and said, "Get out of here." In a voice stripped completely bare of pretense, Selene had not gotten out. She'd stayed because Corbin was watching and because she owed $4 million. And because she was 26 years old and had believed, still half believed, that she was misreading the situation. She was not misreading the situation. She had understood that fully approximately 40 minutes ago, when she'd arrived in the private elevator and heard 2 men talking in the corridor outside the velvet-curtained entrance to the Merrow Crown's VIP floor. They had not noticed her. They were speaking quietly and specifically about what was available tonight, and one of them used her name, and the other laughed. And in the laugh was the particular confidence of men who have paid for things they are not supposed to be able to pay for and have never once been stopped. Selene had turned and walked directly into the VIP bathroom and locked herself in the end stall. That had been 20 minutes ago. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She put the lipstick back in her clutch and looked at her phone. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Corbin and a text that read, "Where are you come out now?" She stared at it. She thought about the exit. There was a service door at the end of the corridor. She'd noticed it on the way in. But Corbin had sent Marcus, the larger of his 2 regular security men, and Marcus was standing somewhere between her and that door. She'd seen him when she stepped off the elevator. He'd given her the small nod that meant, "I've been told to watch you specifically tonight." She couldn't call the police. She had tried once, early on, to raise concerns through official channels. And what had happened was that Corbin's attorney had sent a letter, and her attorney, the one she could still afford, had advised her very carefully that her situation was not the kind that resolved itself favorably through formal complaint. Blackline Entertainment had significant relationships with significant people. She scrolled through her contacts. Most of them weren't real anymore. Industry acquaintances, PR contacts, a stylist who had stopped returning her messages after the cancellation of her last tour, her mother, whom she couldn't call because her mother would panic and be unable to help and would spend the next 6 weeks calling every hour, and Selene did not have the structural capacity for that right now. She kept scrolling. There was a name near the bottom. Not someone she'd entered herself. It had appeared in her phone years ago, passed along at a party. She didn't remember whose party, didn't remember the context, just a name and a number. She'd never called it. She'd almost deleted it twice. The name was D. Saint. Backup. She didn't know who D. Saint was. She dialed. It rang twice. A man answered, no greeting. Just silence at first, a deliberate kind, the kind that isn't waiting but is listening. Hello? She said, and her voice came out wrecked. She cleared her throat. I don't know if I have the right number. I'm sorry. I'm in a situation and I don't have anyone I can call, and where are you? Not a question, a recalibration. The Marrow Crown Hotel, VIP floor, 40th. Brief silence. She could hear nothing on his end, no background sound at all. How many people between you and the service exit? She inhaled sharply. He knew about the service exit. He knew there would be a service exit. She pressed her back against the stall wall and forced her voice to stay level. 1. Big man, maybe 240, suit, his name is Marcus. Armed? Yes. I think yes, under the jacket. What's your name? Selene. Another silence. Shorter. Something shifted in it she couldn't read. Don't hang up, he said. Don't leave the bathroom. Don't open the stall door for anyone until I tell you. Who are you? But the call had gone to a kind of muted quiet that wasn't a disconnect. She could still see the timer running on her screen. And then nothing for what felt like a very long time and was actually, she would later understand, less than 3 minutes. The lights went out, not a gradual dim. All at once, the bathroom, the corridor, the whole 40th floor dropped into a blackness so complete she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. The ambient hum of the hotel's HVAC dropped a register. Somewhere beyond the bathroom door, she heard shouting begin, and then the flat, authoritative barking of security personnel, and then the kind of confused noise that spreads through a crowd of very powerful people who have never in their lives had to deal with circumstances not immediately resolved by money or a phone call. She held completely still. Her phone screen gave off a pale glow in the dark. The call timer still running. She pressed the phone against her ear. Still here, she whispered. I know. His voice was the same, not hurried. The man outside the door is no longer a concern. Come out of the stall. Stay against the left wall. What happened to Marcus? Left wall, he repeated. She opened the stall. The bathroom was dark except for her phone light. She pressed herself against the left wall and moved toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs loud enough that she was half convinced anyone standing outside could hear it. She pushed the door open half an inch. The corridor was dark, lit only by the red wash of emergency lighting at the far ends, and in the red light she could see Marcus on the floor near the elevator bank. He was breathing. She could see his chest moving, but he was down and he was staying down. Standing at the service exit door at the corridor's far end was a figure she could not fully see. Tall. Still. The emergency lighting caught only the edge of him, a shoulder, a jaw, the particular stillness of a man accustomed to waiting in darkness. Move, the voice said in her ear. She moved. She crossed the corridor at something between a walk and a run, her heels catching once on the carpet, and she caught herself against the wall and kept going. And then she was at the service exit, and the man opened the door, and his hand found her wrist with a precision that suggested he had known exactly where she would be. He pulled her through. The service corridor was concrete and functional, stripped of the hotel's expensive cosmetics, lit by a single strip of emergency lighting running along the ceiling. He moved fast, and she matched him, her clutch pressed against her side, her shoes too loud on the bare floor. There were 2 other men in the corridor. She registered them only as shadows that moved with them, flanking. And then they were in a freight elevator, doors closing, dropping. She finally looked at him directly. He was not what she expected. She didn't know what she expected. She hadn't had the cognitive bandwidth to expect anything, but whatever the expectation might have been, it was not this. He was perhaps 35, though his face had the particular agelessness of men who have survived things that accelerate other people. Dark hair, gray eyes. Not the soft gray of photographs, but a harder color, like old iron, like a sky before a storm that is not going to miss you. His face was composed in a way that didn't register as calm, so much as deliberate, the way a man composes a face when the default is something he's decided not to show. There was a scar along his left jaw. Not new, faded, but permanent. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent and showed no sign that he had just walked through a blacked-out hotel floor past a down 240-pound security man. He looked at her once, quickly, assessing, not the way the men upstairs had looked at her, nothing acquisitive in it, and then looked back at the elevator doors. "You're hurt," he said. She looked down. She'd caught her forearm on something in the corridor, a bolt edge or a bracket, and there was a line of blood through the fabric of her sleeve. She hadn't felt it. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "The number you called," he said. "Where did you get it?" I don't know. Someone gave it to me years ago. I don't remember who." The elevator dropped in silence for a moment. When he looked at her again, there was something in his expression she couldn't name. Not surprise exactly, but an adjacent thing. "That number belonged to a man named Garrett Hale," he said. "He died 14 months ago." Selene stared at him. "I didn't know him," she said. "I swear I don't—" "I believe you," he said, and there was no warmth in it, but also no doubt. It was simply a factual statement, the way he would state that it was raining outside. "Hale worked for me. Before he died, he was investigating Blackline Entertainment." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a parking structure, underground, cold, smelling of exhaust and concrete damp. 2 black SUVs waited with engines running, brake lights glowing red in the low light. Selene stood at the elevator threshold and felt the full weight of the last 3 hours settle onto her at once. Her legs had gone unreliable. She put one hand against the elevator door frame. "Who are you?" she said. He stepped out of the elevator and turned back to look at her, one hand on the door to hold it open. The parking structure light fell across his face, and she saw, for the first time, the full geometry of it. The tiredness around the eyes that wasn't sleeplessness but grief, old and compressed, the kind you stopped noticing on your own face because it had been there so long. "Dorian Saint," he said. She knew the name, not specifically, not the way you know the name of someone you've met or researched. The way you know a name you've heard spoken once or twice in rooms where people talked carefully and quietly, where the name appeared in pauses rather than sentences, a name that occupied a particular kind of silence. She crossed the threshold. One of the men who had been flanking them in the corridor opened the rear door of the nearest SUV. Dorian walked to it without looking back to see if she followed, which for some reason she found less arrogant than simply accurate. He knew she would follow. There was nowhere else to go. She got in. The vehicle moved immediately, pulling out of the parking structure into the wet city night. Through the rain-streaked windows, she watched the Marrow Crown Hotel slide past. Its lit facade, its doormen standing under the awning, the line of black cars out front that belonged to the men who had been waiting upstairs. Everything looked completely normal. The hotel looked like a hotel. Dorian sat beside her. He had his phone out and was reading something on it with the focused absence of a man processing information, and she watched him for a moment and then looked back out the window. "Blackline Entertainment," she said. What was Hale investigating? Dorian didn't look up from his phone. "Trafficking, supply networks, political protection infrastructure." "Through the hotel events?" "Partially. Hotels are logistics. The supply chain is older than the hotels." She pressed her thumb into the cut on her forearm without thinking. The sting helped her stay present. "How long has it been running?" "The network we can document goes back 11 years. He paused. The infrastructure behind it is older. 11 years. Selene looked at her own hands in her lap. The hands of a 19-year-old who had signed with Blackline Entertainment on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room full of flowers, because someone had told her the flowers were for her, a welcome, and she had believed it because she was 19 and she had wanted to believe it. "What do you want from me?" she said. Dorian put his phone down and looked at her directly for the first time since the elevator. In the moving light of the city, through the rain-wet windows, his eyes shifted between gray and something darker. "Names," he said. "Details. Everything you witnessed at every event Corbin Vex brought you to. Every man whose face you remember, every conversation you heard, every room you were placed in. And if I give you that, then you'll be safer than you are right now." She noticed he didn't say safe, just safer, the qualifier of an honest man or a careful one, and she suspected he was both. "What happened to Garrett Hale?" she said. A long pause. The SUV moved through the rain. "He was careful and thorough," Dorian said finally, and then one night he wasn't. She understood this was all he was going to say about it. She looked out the window again. The city was thinning. They were moving out of the hotel district, through blocks that became less lit, then through an interchange she didn't recognize. And after another 20 minutes, the city was entirely behind them, and they were on a coastal highway with the ocean somewhere to the right and the rain coming sideways, now visible in the headlights as a wall of horizontal motion. She should have been more afraid than she was. She understood that. Getting into a car with a man who answered dead men's phones, who walked through hotel blackouts like he'd designed them, who spoke about trafficking networks with the flat familiarity of someone who had lived adjacent to their ugliness for years. This was not the behavior of a woman making sound decisions. But she had been making sound decisions for 3 years. She had been careful and cooperative and professionally managed, and it had delivered her into a bathroom stall on the 40th floor, waiting to be sold. She was done making sound decisions. "Where are we going?" she said. "St. Aurelius," he said. "Is that a place or a person?" "Formerly a person. Currently an estate." He glanced at her sideways, and something in his expression shifted briefly. Not softness exactly, but an awareness of her. "It's on the coast. You'll have your own space. No one gets through the perimeter without my authorization. I'm a prisoner. You're a witness," he said. "There's a difference." "Not always." He was quiet for a moment. The rain was fierce now, the highway nearly empty. "Not always," he agreed. The SUV turned onto a private road she wouldn't have seen without knowing where to look. It descended toward the ocean through a corridor of old-growth trees whose branches in the headlights looked like the architecture of something ancient and indifferent. At the end of the road, beyond a gate that opened with no visible mechanism, a structure emerged from the cliff's edge. Large, stone-built, its windows lit in amber against the dark, the Atlantic below it invisible except for the white noise of surf breaking far beneath. St. Aurelius Manor. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cold window glass and exhaled. Behind them, though she didn't know it yet, Corbin Vex was standing in the darkened VIP floor of the Marrow Crown Hotel with his phone to his ear, and the man he was speaking to was not in law enforcement, and the instructions he was receiving were not about filing a report. By morning, her face would be on every entertainment news site in the country. The headline would read, "Selene Vale, Meltdown, Theft, and Disappearance. What really happened at the Marrow Crown." And in a photograph she had never taken, cropped from footage she had never appeared in, Selene Vale would be pictured entering the elevator of the Marrow Crown Hotel with a man whose face was carefully blurred. A man the caption described as a known associate of organized crime. The car stopped. Dorian got out first. One of his men opened her door. She stood on the gravel drive of St. Aurelius with the ocean wind hitting her full in the face, cold and salt-heavy, tearing at her hair. The manor rose above her. Behind her the gate had already closed. She heard Dorian's footsteps on the gravel stop. "There's something else," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen in the elevator. The grief thing, old and compressed, and for the first time it had a shape she could nearly read. Garrett Hale was investigating Blackline specifically because of a name he found in one of their internal transfer files, Dorian said. A woman, early 20s, performer background, brought into the network in the system's early phase. Selene waited. Her name was Selene Saint, he said. She was my sister. The wind came off the Atlantic in a long, continuous push, and somewhere beneath the cliff the ocean broke and broke and broke against the rocks, indifferent and tireless. And Selene looked at Dorian Saint standing in the amber light of his inherited fortress, and understood that neither of them had come to this moment by accident. How long ago, she said. 10 years, he said. 3 months, 11 days. He said it the way people say things they have recited to themselves so many times the number has worn smooth. Then he walked toward the manor door without waiting for her response, and she stood in the dark and the wind for a moment longer, and then she followed. Because there was nowhere else to go, and because, for the first time since she had locked herself in that bathroom stall with cracked lipstick and a dead man's phone number, she thought she might finally understand what this was actually about. The door closed behind her, and outside on the coastal highway, a mile back from the manor gate, a second vehicle sat in a pull-off with its lights off. Inside, a man was photographing the gate through a telephoto lens. He had been following them since the parking structure. The man with the telephoto lens had a name. Selene didn't know it yet. She wouldn't know it for another 4 days, and by the time she did, the knowing would cost her something she hadn't anticipated losing. But that was later. That first night at St. Aurelius, she slept for 11 hours in a room with stone walls and heavy curtains, and a window that looked out over the Atlantic, and she slept the way people sleep after the body has been running on adrenaline for so long that the crash, when it finally arrives, is less like rest and more like a system shutting down. She didn't dream. Or if she did, she didn't remember it, which amounted to the same thing. She woke to gray morning light leaking around the curtain edges and lay still for a long moment, orienting herself. Stone ceiling, the smell of salt and old wood and something faintly like wood smoke. The sound of the ocean below, not the violent push of last night's storm, but a steadier rhythm, the Atlantic in one of its more civil moods. She sat up. On the chair beside the bed, someone had placed a change of clothes, not her size exactly, close enough, practical items, a thick sweater and dark jeans and socks, and beside them, a tray with coffee and bread and a small glass of water. The coffee was still hot, which meant someone had been in the room recently, which meant the privacy of this place was a managed illusion. She drank the coffee standing at the window with the curtain pushed aside, looking down the cliff face to where the ocean moved in long gray swells beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. The estate grounds were visible from here, a wide stretch of cultivated land between the manor and the perimeter wall, with 2 men moving along the wall's interior walkway in what she recognized as a patrol pattern. Unhurried, regular intervals. They weren't trying to hide it. She found Dorian at 7:45 in a room on the manor's east side that functioned as an office, though office was an inadequate word for a space that contained 3 separate workstations, walls of filing that mixed physical and digital in a system she couldn't immediately parse, and a long table covered with documents that bore the particular organized chaos of a project in active motion. He was on the phone when she appeared in the doorway. He looked at her once, held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes, and turned back to the window. She came in and stood at the long table and looked at what was on it. She recognized Blackline Entertainment's corporate logo on a printed document near the corner. Below it, a financial structure diagram with multiple subsidiaries and shell arrangements mapped in precise handwriting. She recognized the name of the Miami hotel where she'd attended the first event that had frightened her. There were photographs, too. Men in suits at social events, some of them familiar faces from television and newspapers, the kind of men whose names appeared regularly in the kind of coverage that described them as influential. One photograph she recognized immediately. A senator, older, silver-haired, photographed at what looked like a campaign fundraiser. She'd seen him at the Chicago event. He'd looked at her across the room once, and she'd had the instinct, the specific animal instinct, to put her back against a wall. "Senator Lucian Graves," Dorian said behind her. She hadn't heard him in the call. She kept her eyes on the photograph. "He was in Chicago," she said. 8 months ago." "I know." Dorian came to stand beside her at the table. He was close enough that she could see the tiredness in him, Not the surface tiredness of a missed night's sleep, but the deeper kind, structural, the way a load-bearing wall shows stress, not in visible cracks, but in a subtle wrong angle. What did you observe? He spoke to Corbin for about 20 minutes in a side room. I was positioned near the door. I couldn't hear what they said. Did anyone approach you directly? His aide did. Younger man, 30 maybe, blonde. He asked if I was enjoying the evening, and I said yes because Marcus was watching me. And then the aide said something about how Senator Graves appreciated discretion in his professional associates. She paused. I knew what that meant. Dorian was writing, not on a phone, on paper, with a pen that moved in fast economical strokes. Selene. He stopped writing and looked at her directly. Everything you can give me, from the beginning. First event, first indication. Take your time, but don't soften it. She pulled out the chair closest to her and sat down. She talked for 2 hours. She was not a natural witness in the sense that made investigators' lives easy. She hadn't kept records, hadn't written things down, hadn't known at the time that what she was experiencing was something that would later require accounting. But she had a specific kind of observational memory, the kind developed by performers who spent years reading rooms, reading audiences, reading the subtle body language of crowds to know when a performance was connecting and when it was losing them. She remembered faces. She remembered the quality of silences in rooms. She remembered who had spoken to whom and who had deliberately not looked at each other and what both things signaled. Dorian listened without interrupting. He wrote things down, occasionally asked a short, specific question that redirected her, occasionally stilled entirely with his pen not moving and his eyes fixed on some middle distance while he processed. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. 11 names, he said, 7 of which we had, 4 new. Is that good? It fills gaps in the topology. He set the pen down. There are corroboration issues with 2 of the existing names. Your testimony addresses one of them directly. She looked at the document spread across the table. The scale of it, the physical space of the evidence, the years of accumulation, pressed down on her in a way that made the last 18 months feel simultaneously enormous and very small. She had been one entry in a ledger she hadn't known existed. Your sister, she said. The pen stopped moving. He had picked it up again to write something on the margin of a document, and now it stopped. What about her? Where does she fit in this? She gestured at the table. Topologically. A short silence. Dorian put the pen down again. She was a musician, he said. Classically trained. She was 22 when she was recruited by a talent management company with surface-level legitimacy. The company had a relationship with Black Line's predecessor organization. He spoke with the evenness of someone delivering a prepared statement, words worn smooth by repetition. She disappeared 11 months after signing. We found evidence she had attempted to document the network internally, notes, recordings. She sent one communication to a contact she trusted that indicated she knew she was in danger. Did she know who you were? What you... Yes, he said. She knew what I was. The flatness of it held everything he wasn't saying. She didn't come to you, Selene said carefully. A long pause. No, he said. She didn't. He picked up the pen and wrote one word on the margin of the document, and she didn't look at what it was. We had argued before her disappearance. She had views about the nature of my business, and I had chosen my business over her views, and she had made her own decision about what that meant for our relationship. He looked at the window. The gray Atlantic was visible in the distance. She was right about most of it. Selene said nothing. She was the better person, Dorian said. Not with sentiment. Just as a fact, the way you report a measurement. Then he stood up and rolled the tension out of his neck with a single movement and became again the closed, functional thing he was in operational mode and said, There's someone I need you to meet. The someone was a woman named Priya Sachs. Priya had arrived at St. Aurelius sometime during the night. Selene hadn't heard a vehicle, and was now installed in a smaller office off the east corridor with a laptop, 2 external monitors, and the specific territorial air of someone who had rearranged the furniture to her specifications within the first 15 minutes of arriving. She was perhaps 40, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses. She kept pushing up her nose in a manner that suggested she had decided early in life that social pleasantries were a zero-return investment. "This is the witness," Priya said, without looking up from her screen. "Her name is Selene," Dorian said. "I know her name." Priya pushed her glasses up. "I know a lot of her names. Abandoned by Blackline Entertainment after commercial decline, quote-unquote. Sources report erratic behavior and financial mismanagement. That's from a piece published 3 hours ago on Horizon Beat." She turned the monitor toward them. "They're already running it." Selene read the headline. She had expected something like this. The expectation did not reduce the specific cold quality of seeing her name attached to words like erratic and decline in print. "There are 7 pieces across different outlets," Priya continued, "all published within a 90-minute window, which means they were written before last night's event, which means Corbin had them prepared in advance as contingency." She paused. "He was planning for the possibility you'd run." "He's covered himself," Selene said. "Better. He's covered his clients. Any testimony you give about those events is now preemptively contextualized as coming from a woman with documented instability and a history of making unfounded allegations." Priya said this without inflection, simply as an assessment. "It's a clean preemptive strike." Selene looked at the monitor for another moment and then looked away. The room felt slightly smaller than it had a minute ago. "What does it change?" Dorian said. "Our timeline," Priya said. "We needed 2 more weeks to build the corroboration structure to a point where testimony could carry institutional weight. Now every day we wait is another day they have to add layers to the narrative." She tapped her pen against the desk edge. "We might have 8 days, possibly less." "Then we work with 8 days," Dorian said. Priya looked at Selene over the top of her glasses with the particular expression of someone assessing structural load capacity. "How good is your memory for documentation?" she said. "Paperwork, contracts, anything you physically signed." "Good," Selene said. "I have copies of everything in a storage unit in—" "Don't say where," Dorian said. She looked at him. "The vehicle that followed us from the Marrow Crown," he said. "They know you're with me. They don't know what you have. Don't give anyone, information that could help them prioritize what to destroy." She absorbed this. "They'd go into my storage unit. They'd go anywhere the files could be." The weight of that settled. She had kept the copies methodically, a habit from the early years when she'd had a manager who'd told her, "Always keep your own records because no one else will keep them for you." But she'd kept them as self-protection from the business side of Blackline's control, not from anything like this. "I need to make a call," she said. "To who?" Priya said. "My mother." A brief silence. "Is there anything in your mother's possession," Dorian said, "that Corbin Vex would want to locate?" "No." "Is your mother's address in any public record that connects to you?" "She remarried 7 years ago. Different name, different city." Dorian considered, then, "Short. Don't tell her where you are. Don't mention me or this location. Tell her you're safe and that you'll explain when you can, and that she should not speak to anyone from your former agency or any journalist." Selene called her mother from the east corridor with the door closed. The call took 9 minutes and involved her mother crying for approximately 4 of them, which she had anticipated, and requiring reassurance at a level of specificity she could not provide, which she had also anticipated, and which cost her something to navigate because she was not made of stone and her mother was her mother. And this was the first real human voice she'd heard since a hotel bathroom in a city that now felt very far away. When she came back into Priya's office, her eyes were dry, and her face was arranged correctly, but Priya looked at her once and said, "There's tea in the kitchen, end of the corridor, second door," which was the closest thing to kindness Priya apparently did. She didn't get the tea. She went back to the East office and spent the afternoon with Dorian going through the documentation she could reconstruct from memory, cross-referencing against Priya's existing research, building a timeline of events that Selene had attended, and the names she could attach to each one. It was detailed work that required her to hold in her mind images she would have preferred not to hold, certain rooms, certain lights, the faces of certain men who had looked at her with a specific kind of ownership. And she did it without stopping because the alternative was thinking about what those images meant for the other women, the ones she'd glimpsed at the events, and not known how to help. By evening, she had given them more than she'd thought she had. By evening, she was also starting to understand the man she was working with. Not the myth, not the Dorian Saint of those careful pauses in rooms where his name had occasionally appeared. The specific human person, which was different and in some ways more troubling. He didn't eat regular meals. She noticed this because she did, and the contrast was visible. He sustained himself on coffee and intermittent attention to food when Priya or one of the other men put it in front of him. He didn't sleep in patterns she could identify. When he worked, he was completely present, a kind of attention that felt almost physical. And when he was not actively working, there was a quality about him like a machine running on low power, functional but withheld, conserving something. He was meticulous in ways that went beyond professional habit. The documents on the table were not just organized. They were organized in a specific logic that she, over the course of the afternoon, began to understand. Everything arranged in relation to Lena's case at its center, the network documentation radiating outward from that fixed point. He had spent 10 years building a case that was, in its deepest structure, a case about his sister. Everything else was connected tissue. She thought about that. She thought about the kind of person who sustains that kind of fixation for 10 years without letting it become the only thing they are. And she concluded, watching him across the table as he read through a document with one hand pressed flat against the page, that he had not entirely succeeded at that. Some part of what should have remained human in him had been redirected into the architecture of this project. She didn't say any of this, but she thought it. On the third day, things broke open. It started with a phone call Dorian received at 6 a.m. that Selene heard through the thin wall of her room. Not the words, just the quality of his voice, which shifted in a way she'd already learned to read as something going wrong. By the time she was dressed and downstairs, the East office had 3 additional people in it she hadn't seen before. And the energy in the room was the specific compressed energy of people who have received bad news and are converting it rapidly into operational response. "What happened?" she said from the doorway. Priya looked up. "Your storage unit." Selene's stomach dropped cleanly through the floor. "They broke in last night," Priya said. "Physical documents are gone. They missed the digital copies because you weren't keeping them there, correct?" "Correct. I have everything digital on an encrypted drive." "Where?" "Not in the storage unit." She paused. "Hidden at my apartment." The silence in the room had a particular texture. "Is your apartment accessible to Corbin's people?" Dorian said. He was standing at the window with his back to her, which she was already learning meant he was managing his own reaction before he turned around. "He knows the address," she said. "I don't know if he has a key. He might. My former assistant, he was Corbin's hire originally, he had access." Dorian turned around. His face was the composed thing. Behind it was something else. "Tell me where the drive is," he said. "Exactly." She told him. He was on his phone before she finished the sentence. The next 3 hours were a kind of waiting she wasn't equipped for. The waiting of someone who has just discovered that the ground they were standing on has a specific vulnerability, and there is nothing to do but hope. Dorian's man reached the apartment and found the door locked and apparently undisturbed, but it took another 40 minutes to confirm the drive was where she'd said it was. And during those 40 minutes, she sat in the kitchen of St. Aurelius with the mug of tea she'd finally gotten around to making, and stared at the grain of the kitchen table, and thought about all the decisions she had not made over the past 3 years that had brought her to this specific table. The drive was there, intact. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like most of the morning. But then, that afternoon, the second thing happened. Priya called her and Dorian into her office and closed the door with a deliberateness that meant she had something to say that she had been deciding how to say. "There's a problem with the corroboration structure," Priya said. She pulled up a document on her main monitor, cross-referencing Selene's testimony with the existing testimony sources. "I found a conflict." Dorian waited. "Our original account of the Chicago event came from a source inside Blackline's accounting structure," Priya said. The source stated that the Chicago event was attended by 6 clients from the network's political tier. Selene's account places 8 individuals at that event, including 2 whose presence would significantly elevate the charge profile. "The source was wrong about the head count," Dorian said. "Possibly," Priya said. or the source deliberately undercounted? A silence. You think the source is compromised, Dorian said. I think the source has been inside Blackline's accounting department for 2 years, Priya said. And I think their account of 3 separate events has minor inaccuracies that individually look like the natural imprecision of human memory. Collectively, they look like a pattern of protective omission. She pushed her glasses up and looked at Dorian directly. Someone feeding us information has been feeding us slightly wrong information, specifically wrong in ways that protect the higher-tier clients. The quality of the silence in the room changed. Selene looked at Dorian. His jaw had shifted in a barely perceptible way, a tightening along the muscle below his ear. Who else has access to the corroboration structure? He said quietly. That's the question, Priya said. Selene looked between them. She understood what she was watching. A world where trust was a managed resource, discovering that the management had a leak. She'd seen this in the music industry, smaller scale, the specific corrosive effect of not knowing which person in the room was selling information. It was worse here. Here the stakes were not careers. How long have you suspected? Dorian asked. Priya was quiet for one moment. 6 days. The air changed again. Selene pressed her back against her chair and went very still. 6 days, Dorian said. The 2 words were completely flat. I wanted to confirm the pattern before I go. 6 days, Priya. I know, she said. She met his eyes without flinching, which Selene thought took something. I know. I needed to be certain before I said it to you specifically. Why specifically me? Priya looked at him steadily. Because you're the one who recruited him. Another silence. This one had weight. Say the name, Dorian said. I want to be clear that I have corroborating analysis and not say the name. Priya looked at the screen for one moment and then back at Dorian. Reeves, she said. Our contact inside the Chicago PD liaison office. The one who's been cross-validating our evidence chain against the city investigation. Dorian said nothing. He stood with his hands at his sides and his face doing the composed thing with visible effort. And then he walked out of the room and closed the door quietly behind him. And from the corridor, Selene heard nothing at all. Priya pushed her glasses up and looked at her monitor. He trusted Reeves, Selene said. Dorian trusted 3 people completely in his life, Priya said, without sentiment. His sister, Garrett Hale, and Reeves. She moved her cursor across the screen. His sister is gone. Hale is dead. Now this. Selene looked at the closed door. How bad is it, she said. If Reeves has been feeding them our evidence chain. Priya was quiet for a moment that stretched. It means Corbin Vex has known for some time what we can prove and what we can't, she said. It means the political clients who don't yet appear on our confirmed list may have had time to begin covering their exposure. She paused. It also means someone on their side has known, for some time, that you are here. The cold came back. They already know, Selene said. The vehicle that followed you from the Marrow Crown already knew, Priya said. Reeves' knowing confirms the duration. She looked at Selene over her glasses. You've been here 3 days. If Reeves passed your location within 24 hours of your arrival, then the question isn't whether they know where you are. The question is why they haven't moved yet. Selene thought about the patrolmen she'd seen on the wall from her window. She thought about the gate that opened with no visible mechanism. She thought about the weight of the Atlantic below the cliffs and the particular silence of a place designed to feel like safety. Why haven't they? She said. Priya's face did something she couldn't fully read. Because moving against Dorian Saint at St. Aurelius directly is not a decision men like Corbin Vex make casually, she said, but they will make it, when the calculation changes. She closed the document on her screen. 8 days was already an optimistic estimate. With this, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Selene sat in the chair in Priya's office while the afternoon light through the single window went gray and thin, and she understood that the decision she had made in a bathroom stall, the desperate random dial of a dead man's number, had pulled her into the center of something that had been accumulating mass for 10 years, and that there was no version of the next 8 days that looked anything like the life she had been living 3 days ago. She had known that in the parking structure. But knowing it and feeling it were different, and she was feeling it now, the full specific gravity of no return, settling into the bones of her like the cold from the Atlantic stone of the walls. From somewhere deep in the manor she heard a door close. Then silence. And then, faint but clear through the stone and the distance, the sound she would later realize was Dorian Saint in a room alone, playing a recording on a device he kept in his coat pocket. A woman's voice, young, laughing at something, caught mid-sentence by whoever was holding the phone. A recording so worn with replaying that the audio had degraded at the edges, the laugh breaking slightly on every... The recording lasted 47 seconds. Selene knew this because she stood in the corridor outside the room where Dorian was, and she counted, because counting was something to do with the part of her mind that would otherwise have been imagining the expression on his face in there alone with his sister's voice coming out of a degraded audio file for probably the 10,000th time. She didn't knock. She stood there until the 47 seconds were done, and then she walked back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. She thought about Priya's last words, the recording breaking at the edges, the laugh that no longer resolved cleanly into sound. She thought about what it meant to build 10 years of your life around a ghost. She thought about Reeves. She didn't sleep until after 2 in the morning, and when she did, it was the shallow, restless kind, full of rooms she recognized and exits she couldn't find. At 5:45, she woke to the sound of boots in the corridor moving fast. She was dressed and at her door in under 2 minutes. The corridor was lit, and 2 of Dorian's men were moving toward the east wing with a purposefulness that wasn't patrol. It was response. She followed them without being invited. The east office had 4 people in it. Dorian was at the central workstation with Priya standing behind his left shoulder, both of them looking at a monitor, and the quality of the air in the room was the specific quality of people who have just received information that has altered the shape of everything. "What happened?" Selene said. Dorian looked up. Something in his face had shifted since she'd last seen him the evening before. The composed thing was still there, but it was doing more work than usual, holding back more. "Reeves made contact 20 minutes ago," he said. "He reached out to you." He reached out to confirm a meeting he claims was already scheduled. Routine coordination. Dorian turned the monitor toward her. It showed an encrypted message thread, the kind that displayed only fragments. "He doesn't know we've identified the discrepancy pattern. He thinks he's still inside." "So we let him think that," Selene said. "We're already doing that," Priya said, without looking up from her own screen. "The question is what we do with it." "We use him," Selene said. "Feed him false information. See what they move to protect." Priya pushed her glasses up. Dorian looked at Selene for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "That's exactly what we're going to do," he said. The meeting with Reeves was set for that evening in the city. A location Reeves proposed and Dorian accepted without modification, because changing the location would signal awareness. Dorian would go with 2 men. Priya would monitor remotely. The information they would feed Reeves was constructed over the course of the morning with the specific architecture of something convincing enough to swallow. A false timeline, a fabricated witness they would describe as being in protective federal custody, a suggested evidence gap in the political tier of the network that would, if Reeves passed it along faithfully, cause Corbyn's people to focus protective energy in entirely the wrong direction. It was a clean plan. Selene spent the morning in Priya's office helping build the false testimony profile, and she was good at it. The performer's instinct for what reads as authentic, what detail makes a constructed thing feel real. By noon, they had a fabricated witness named Thomas Arden, with a plausible background and a specific gap in his testimony that would look, to anyone receiving it, like an exploitable weakness. Dorian reviewed it and said, "This will work." Priya said, "It'll work if Reeves passes it in the next 12 hours. If he waits longer, the timeline won't hold." "He won't wait," Dorian said. "He's been passing information within 6 hours of receiving it. That's been the pattern." The pattern. Selene looked at him across the table, and he was looking at the document with the flat attention of someone doing math, and she thought about what it cost to say that's been the pattern about a man you had trusted completely. She didn't think it cost nothing. She thought it cost the kind of thing you paid invisibly that settled into the body and stayed. At 3 in the afternoon, Dorian left for the city. The manor was quieter without him in a way that was disproportionate to one person's absence, which told her something about the way the place organized itself around him. Priya worked without pause. The patrol on the walls continued its regular intervals. Selene walked the manor's interior corridors for 20 minutes because she needed to move and the grounds weren't an option. Priya had told her without phrasing it as a restriction that the interior was preferable until Dorian was back. She ended up in a room on the manor's west side that she hadn't been in before. A sitting room, older than the working spaces, with furniture that suggested it had been arranged for someone and then not rearranged when that someone stopped using it. There was a shelf of books and a small side table and a chair angled toward the window overlooking the Atlantic, and beside the chair on the table, a glass bowl containing a few smooth stones and a folded piece of paper that had been there long enough to have developed a slight curve. She didn't touch the paper. She stood at the window and watched the ocean, which was doing its indifferent thing, gray-green swells moving in long, patient lines toward the cliff base. She thought about Selene Saint, 22 years old, classically trained, recruited by a talent management company with surface-level legitimacy. She thought about herself at 19 in a conference room full of flowers. She thought about the women she'd seen at the events, the one she hadn't helped, the one in Chicago who had grabbed her wrist and said, "Get out of here." And she wondered where that woman was now, and whether anyone had built a 10-year case around finding out. She sat down in the chair that had been arranged for someone else, and stayed there until the light off the water went from gray to a darker gray, and she heard Priya's voice from somewhere in the east wing, raised slightly, which was not normal. She was on her feet immediately. Priya was in the corridor outside her office on the phone, and the set of her shoulders was wrong. Not the compact professional tension of someone managing a problem, but the different tension of someone managing something they had not anticipated. She held up one finger to Selene, "Wait," and continued the phone conversation in short responses. Then she ended the call and looked at Selene, and for the first time since Selene had met her, Priya's expression had something in it that was not controlled. "There's been a change," she said. "What kind?" The meeting location. Priya moved back into her office and pulled up something on her monitor. Reeves proposed a change 40 minutes ago. New location, different part of the city. Dorian accepted because refusing would signal, but the new location is a variable we didn't plan for. What's wrong with the new location? It's inside Senator Graves' district. It's a building that has documented connections to Graves' office's real estate holdings. Priya stared at the screen. Dorian is walking into a meeting that Reeves has moved to a location controlled by the man we're investigating. The cold came back fast. "Can you reach Dorian?" His phone is on communication silence during the meeting approach. Standard protocol. Priya pressed her lips together. "He'll be inside in 14 minutes. Selene looked at the monitor. The building address sat there, specific and solid. "Who else can you reach?" "I have one man in the city. He's 22 minutes from the location." "That's 8 minutes after Dorian's inside." "Yes." A silence. "Is it a trap?" Selene said. Priya looked at her monitor. If Reeves moved the location on Graves' instruction, then the question isn't whether it's a trap. The question is what kind. She paused. "Could be an extraction. They take Dorian, use him as leverage to bury the investigation. Could be documentation. They want proof of his identity and activities for a counterstrike. Could be—" She stopped. "Or they kill him," Selene said. Priya didn't answer, which was an answer. Selene looked at the door. She thought about the cars in the manor's motor court. She thought about the 14 minutes. "I can drive," she said. "Absolutely not." "You have one man 22 minutes out. I'm here now. Give me a car and a phone and I can be at that building before Dorian goes inside." "You're a civilian witness in a protected location. I'm a person who's faster than your backup." Selene looked at her directly. "If something happens to Dorian because you spent 8 minutes following protocol, then your investigation dies with him and every name on that table walks free. You know that." Priya stared at her screen. "You'd be approaching a potentially hostile location with no training and no—" "I know what hostile locations feel like," Selene said. "I've been in them for 18 months and I survived them because I paid attention. Give me a car." 13 seconds of silence. Priya opened her desk drawer and took out a phone and a set of car keys and held them out. Black Range Rover, east side of the motor court, she said. The phone has one contact. Call it when you're 2 minutes out. My man redirects to meet you. You do not go inside that building. You wait at the perimeter and you call me the moment Dorian comes out. And if he does not come out, you leave. Do you understand me? Selene took the keys and the phone. Yes, she said. She did not entirely mean it. The city was 40 minutes in daylight. She did it in 26, on roads that were still wet from the previous night's rain, and she was not a reckless driver by nature, but she had a very clear calculation running in her head that reduced the decision-making to almost nothing. She called the contact number at the 2-minute mark. A man's voice answered, and she gave him the cross street, and he said he was 11 minutes out, and she said she understood and disconnected. She parked on the street 1 block from the address and got out and stood on the wet pavement in the cold evening air and looked at the building. It was a commercial structure, 6 stories, ground floor retail shuttered for the night, upper floors with lit windows that suggested occupancy, but no specific movement visible from the street. There was a black car parked directly outside the entrance that had not been there when the building's street-level photo on the property records had been taken. She knew this because Priya had pulled it up on the monitor, and she'd looked at it for the 20 seconds available to her before leaving. There was a second car parked on the far side of the entrance. There were 2 men standing outside the building's main door who were not dressed for the weather. Coats too thin for the temperature, the particular stillness of men who were outside for professional rather than personal reasons. Dorian was already inside. She knew this because there was no vehicle she could attribute to him on the street, and because the meeting was scheduled for the top of the hour, and she had arrived 4 minutes past it. She pressed herself against the wall of the adjacent building and looked at the entrance and thought very specifically about what Priya had said. You do not go inside, you wait at the perimeter. She counted the men outside, 2 visible, possibly more at the building's rear. She thought about the 8 minutes until backup arrived. She thought about Dorian Saint walking into a room that Reeves had moved to a building owned by the man whose political protection had sustained a trafficking network for 11 years, carrying false information he believed was going to misdirect that network, not knowing that the man he'd trusted for years had been feeding the other side a map of everything Dorian could prove. She thought about a woman's voice on a degraded recording, laughing at something, caught mid-sentence. She went inside. The lobby was the kind that had once been maintained and was now functional without being cared for. Tile floor, fluorescent lighting at half capacity, a security desk unmanned, an elevator bank to the right. No one in the lobby. She moved past the desk into the elevator and pressed the button and stood with her heart doing its thing against her ribs, the specific rhythm of a body being asked to do something it had not been designed for. The elevator took her to the 5th floor, which was where the building's registered tenant, a consulting firm with a paper trail that led in 3 directions and resolved nowhere specific, occupied the primary suite. She had seen this on the property documents for exactly long enough to know it. The corridor on 5 was carpeted and dim, half the overhead lights off. She could hear voices from behind a door at the corridor's far end before she was halfway down it. She stopped. She pressed herself against the wall beside a doorway recess and listened. 2 voices she didn't know. Then a third she did. Dorian, and his voice had a careful quality that told her he was managing something, that the composed thing was working very hard. Then a 4th voice. She knew this voice too, though she'd only heard it once, on a phone Priya had played a recording of during the evidence review 2 days ago. Priya had made her listen to identify any vocal recognition from the events she'd attended. Senator Lucian Graves. He was not supposed to be here. This was not a routine coordination meeting between Dorian and a compromised informant. This was something else entirely, and she understood with the specific cold clarity of a person whose instincts have been calibrated by 18 months of reading rooms that she had walked into the latter half of something that had already been fully arranged before anyone in St. Aurelius had begun to suspect the scope of it. She moved to the door and put her ear against the frame. "Appreciate you coming," Graves was saying, and his voice had the particular warm authority of a man who had spent 40 years being listened to. "I wanted this to be direct, professional." "You moved the location," Dorian's voice. "Reeves told you I'd accepted." "Reeves told me a great deal," Graves said, "including the name Thomas Arden." A silence. "Interesting name," Graves continued. I had my people check federal protective custody intake for the last 60 days. Thomas Arden doesn't appear because Thomas Arden doesn't exist. A pause. You fed Reeves a fabricated witness to see what I'd move to protect. I appreciate the tradecraft. I do. But I've been in rooms with considerably more sophisticated operators than you, Mr. Saint, and I've been doing this since before you were managing anyone's grief. Selene pressed harder against the wall. What do you want? Dorian said. I want this to conclude, Graves said. Not you. I want to be clear about that. You're useful to certain parties in ways that make your removal counterproductive. What I want is the investigation file. Everything. The corroboration structure, the testimony record, the evidence chain. In exchange, I can offer you the one thing you actually want, which is, don't, Dorian said. Information about your sister's final location, what happened to her, where she is now. Graves' voice was completely level, the way a man's voice is level when he has rehearsed the specific words. I have documentation you don't. I've had it for years. You've been building toward a truth I could give you in 10 minutes. Selene heard Dorian's breathing change through the door. She heard it because the corridor was very quiet, and because the change was the kind that happens when a body receives something it has been waiting for 10 years. You're lying, Dorian said, but the certainty in it was not complete. I'm not, Graves said simply. Selene Saint, 22 years old, recruited by Meridian Talent Group, subsidiary 3 layers removed from Blackline's predecessor. Disappeared from record in the network's 3rd operational year. You know all of this. A pause. You don't know what happened in the 14 days before she disappeared. You don't know the name of the man she trusted with her documentation before she was taken. You don't know where she is. The silence on the other side of the door was the worst kind. Selene had her hand on the door handle before she knew she'd reached for it. She stopped herself. She stood with her hand on the handle and her forehead nearly against the door's surface, and she listened. If I give you the investigation file, Dorian said, the network continues operating. The network, Graves said, has been operating for 11 years and will continue regardless of what you do in whatever time remains to you. You cannot dismantle it from outside it. You know this. You've known it for years, or you'd have gone to federal channels directly instead of building a private evidence architecture that you can't weaponize without institutional support you don't have. He paused. I'm offering you the truth about your sister. I'm offering you the opportunity to stop carrying something that has consumed everything you were before you picked it up. And the women in the network. Graves was quiet for a moment. That's not within my authority to address, he said. It's not within your authority, Dorian repeated. I'm a component of a larger structure. I can offer what's mine to offer. Another silence. Selene pressed her hand flat against the door. I need time, Dorian said. Of course, Graves said, and in the of course was the specific ease of a man who knows he has already won. Then a different voice, one of the two she hadn't recognized earlier, said something short and quiet, and she heard a shift of movement, and she pulled back from the door and into the recessed doorway across the corridor in the 2 seconds she had before the door opened. Reeves came out first. She had never seen Reeves in person. She'd seen a photograph Priya had shown her, middle-aged, gray at the temples, the kind of face that registered as trustworthy because the lines in it looked like reliability. In person, he was smaller than the photograph suggested, and he walked with the specific quality of a man who had done something he intended to do and was now in the part that came after, where the weight of it settled. He didn't see her. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited. And she stayed completely still in the recess, and the elevator came and he got in, and the doors closed. She was back at the door before the elevator had finished descending. She pushed it open. The room was a conference space, long table, chairs, windows on the far wall, showing the city's evening lights. Graves was at the far end of the table, his coat already on, a man beside him who was built the way men are built when their professional role requires it. A second man near the window. And Dorian. He was standing at the near end of the table with his back to her, and he didn't turn when she came in, and she understood from the set of his shoulders that he had heard the door and had identified her in some way that precluded surprise. Graves looked at her. His expression did something she hadn't expected. Not alarm, not the specific recalibration of a man encountering an unexpected variable. Something more like recognition. Ms. Vale, he said. She stopped. You know who I am, she said. I've known who you were since the Marrow Crown, he said. Corbin Vex informed me immediately. You were an unexpected development. He tilted his head slightly. You are more resilient than your public profile suggested. She looked at Dorian's back. She looked at the line of his shoulders. She looked at the way he was standing. Very still, the low power thing, but charged now the way a still thing is charged when it is deciding. Tell him no, she said. Dorian turned. His face was doing something she had not seen it do before. The composition was there, but it was fractured in places. Around the eyes specifically, where the controlled thing had worn through to something raw and exhausted underneath. You heard, he said. I heard enough. Graves watched them with the patient interest of a man who has seen a great many versions of this kind of conversation. Tell him no, Selene said again. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady. Whatever he offered you about Lena, you tell him no. You don't know what he has, Dorian said. I know what he's asking for in exchange. She held his eyes. The file. 10 years of documentation. Every name we have, every woman who's still in that network whose only chance of getting out depends on someone having the evidence to break it open. She paused. He gets that file and none of them get out, ever, and you know that. Dorian's jaw moved. He has information about my sister, he said. Not arguing, something worse. The flat recitation of a fact he was trying to evaluate without the part of him that was incapable of evaluating it neutrally. I know, she said. 14 days before she disappeared, where she is. His voice was completely even, in the way that meant it was costing him everything to keep it even. I've been looking for 10 years. I know, she said again. You don't, he said, and the evenness cracked on the last word, just slightly, a fracture along the edge. You don't know what it is to... You don't... My mother, she said. He stopped. When I called her from this manor, Selene said, she cried for 4 minutes, and I couldn't tell her where I was, or how long it would be, or whether I was going to be all right. I have been running from a man who controls my career and my debt and my public identity for 3 years, and she has watched it happen and been unable to help me, and I have been unable to tell her the truth. She paused. I know what it is to have someone you love unreachable. I know what it costs. He looked at her. It's not the same, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. Yours is worse, but the answer is still no. Graves had been watching this with the same patient expression. Now he shifted, almost imperceptibly, and the man beside him shifted too, and Selene registered this in the peripheral way that her body had learned to register threat. Mr. Saint, Graves said, I'd encourage you not to let an emotional appeal from someone who arrived here apparently without your knowledge delay a decision that has a time constraint attached to. How did you get in this building? Dorian said to Selene. Front door. Past the 2 men outside. They were watching the street, not the door directly. I came from the adjacent building's side access. He stared at her for a moment. Then something in his expression shifted in a way she hadn't seen before, so not the grief thing, not the operational thing, but a different thing, newer, like a recognition of a specific unexpected quality in a person you had categorized as something simpler. Then he turned back to Graves. No, he said. Graves was still for a moment. Consider what you're... I've considered it. Dorian reached into his jacket and removed his phone and did something on the screen. You moved this meeting to a building you control because you needed Reeves to confirm that I'd accepted the new location before you committed to attending, which means you were prepared for me to refuse and you wanted documentation of this conversation as leverage. You've been recording since I walked in. He looked at Graves directly. Whatever you have about my sister, you obtained during the operational period of a criminal network for which you provided political protection. Any documentation in your possession is evidence, and I will find it. Graves' expression changed. It was not dramatic, just a settling, the specific change that happens in a face when it moves from one posture to another. You're making a significant miscalculation, he said quietly. I'm making the only calculation that's available to me, Dorian said. Then the window broke. Not the glass. The frame around it impacted from outside, and the man who had been standing near the window was suddenly moving, and the second man had his hand inside his coat, and Dorian was in motion the same instant, and Selene was grabbed. Not roughly, with the specific intentional force of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, and pulled against the wall beside the door. It was Dorian's hand on her arm. "Don't move," he said, directly into her ear. The room went into the controlled chaos of men responding to a breach, and in the chaos, Graves moved toward the second exit at the room's far end with his security close around him, and the man near the window was on his phone, and then there were more sounds from the corridor. Footsteps, the flat, authoritative bark of Dorian's man who had arrived, finally, from the street. Dorian kept his hand on her arm and moved her through the door into the corridor, and they were moving again, the way they had moved through the Marrow Crown Hotel, fast and close, and in the direction of the stairs rather than the elevator. "The window," she said, breathing. "Distraction. They wanted Graves out of the building before the situation escalated." He pushed the stairwell door open. "They weren't here for me." They were protecting Graves. They were protecting his exposure. This conversation happening is a liability for him. Getting him clear was the priority. He moved them down the stairs at a pace that required her full attention on her footing. He won't move against the investigation directly tonight. This meeting didn't go the way he planned. He'll move against it another way. "Yes," Dorian said. They came out the building's rear exit into a service alley, and the city air hit her cold and immediate, and somewhere to her right she could hear the distant sound of a vehicle arriving at speed on the adjacent street. Dorian stopped in the alley and turned to look at her. He was breathing hard, not panicked, the breathing of someone who has been running at full operational capacity and is now in the 3-second pause between threats. "The drive," he said. "The encrypted drive from your apartment. My man retrieved it, and it's at the manor." "I know." "Priya has been analyzing it for 2 days." He looked at her in the alley's low light. "There's something on it she flagged last night. She told me before I left for this meeting." He paused. "She didn't tell you." Selene looked at him. "What's on it?" she said. "A contract document you signed in the 3rd year of your Blackline tenure. A standard appearance agreement for a private entertainment series." His voice was doing the flat thing. "You signed it because Corbin told you it was a residual performance clause. It wasn't." "What was it?" Dorian's jaw moved. "It was a consent document," he said. "Backdated and constructed to imply participation in the network's client events. It has your signature. It has language that, in the right framing, reads as voluntary association with activities the network will characterize as criminal." He held her eyes. "If they file it in a federal context before we can break the network, it doesn't just damage your testimony. It makes you a named participant." The alley was cold and narrow, and the city moved around it without awareness of anything it contained, and Selene stood in it and let the specific shape of this new thing settle over her. Corbin had been building the case against her for years, not as a reaction to her escape, as a contingency that had been there from the beginning, waiting. She had been, from the moment she signed that document without reading it closely enough, already positioned as expendable and already positioned as criminal. She thought about the 19-year-old in the conference room full of flowers. She thought about how long the flowers had probably been dead before she noticed. She looked at Dorian Saint in a service alley in a city that was doing its normal, indifferent evening, and she felt something change in her. Not break, not collapse. Change. The way a material changes when it's been subjected to enough sustained pressure that its internal structure rearranges into something with a different tensile quality. Something harder and less forgiving, and significantly more, something harder and less forgiving, and significantly more dangerous than the woman who had locked herself in a bathroom stall 6 days ago. "Show me the document," she said. They were back at St. Aurelius by 9:45. Priya had the contract on screen before Selene had fully crossed the threshold of the East Office, which meant Priya had been waiting with it, which meant she had been managing the specific discomfort of knowing something the subject of that something did not yet know. Selene stood in front of the monitor and read it. She read it twice. The first time her vision kept wanting to slide off the language, the dense contractual syntax, the embedded clauses that operated like trapdoors, the signature at the bottom that was unmistakably hers. The second time, she forced herself to slow down and parse every phrase, and by the end of the second reading, she understood exactly what Corbin had done and how long he had been doing it and the specific elegance of its construction. She had signed away her defense 3 years before she needed it. "How many people have seen this?" she said. "On our side, 3, Priya said. "On their side," she paused. "Unknown. It exists in Blackline's legal archive. We found it on the drive because you had a copy of every document you signed, including this one, which means you signed it and filed it without reading the operative clauses closely enough." "I was 23, Selene said. "Corbin told me it was a residual clause." "I know." "Can it be challenged?" Priya looked at Dorian. Dorian was standing at the window with his back to both of them, and he didn't turn. "In time, with the right legal architecture, yes," Priya said carefully. "The backdating is detectable under forensic document analysis. The consent language is constructed in a way that would not survive aggressive scrutiny. But that process takes months, and if Corbin files it in a federal context before we break the network, it doesn't need to survive scrutiny," Selene said. "It just needs to muddy mine." "Yes," Priya said. Selene looked at the document on the screen. She looked at her own signature. "Then, we don't have 8 days," she said. "We don't have any days? If Graves reports back that tonight's meeting failed and Corbin knows I was in that building, they'll file the document tomorrow." Priya said nothing. Dorian turned around. "We move tonight," he said. Priya's head came up. "The evidence structure isn't complete. We're missing corroboration on 4 of the political tier. If we wait for complete, we lose the window." His voice was the operational thing, fully engaged now. The grief thing pushed somewhere below the surface, where it was doing its work invisibly. "What do we have that's sufficient for federal intake right now?" "Not ideal. Sufficient." Priya pulled up a different document. She moved through it quickly, annotating as she went, and Selene watched her and understood she was watching a woman rebuild a structure under time pressure, rerouting around the missing pieces. "Sufficient for intake?" Priya said after 4 minutes. "Not sufficient for a clean prosecution without supplementary testimony." "Selene's testimony covers 4 of the 6 gaps," Dorian said. "Her testimony is now pre-compromised by the contract document. If we file simultaneously, the evidence package and a forensic challenge to the contract, the challenge creates enough question to hold the testimony's weight pending outcome. That requires a federal contact who will accept simultaneous filing tonight." Dorian's expression didn't change. "I have one." Priya pushed her glasses up and looked at him with the expression of someone recalculating a load-bearing assessment. "Marin," she said. "Yes." "You haven't spoken to Marin in 18 months, he said. "I'm aware." Priya looked at her screen. She looked at it for a long moment in the way she looked at things when she was running probability. "If Marin accepts the package tonight," she said slowly, "and Blackline files the contract document tomorrow, you have a 12 to 24-hour window where both things exist in federal space simultaneously, and neither has resolved. In that window, the investigation is live, but so is the threat to Selene's testimony." "That window is what we're working with," Dorian said. "And the port," Selene said. Both of them looked at her. She had been quiet for the last exchange, thinking, and the thinking had arrived at a specific place. "The files," she said. "The shipping manifests at Blackwater Port. That's in the documentation on the table. 3 days ago you told me there were physical files at that location that would, if obtained, independently corroborate every name in the political tier without relying on witness testimony at all." Dorian was still. "Getting to those files requires going into an active operational location," he said. "One that Graves people control the security on. Tonight," she said, "before they know what we filed with Marin, before they think to move the files." "The port has 12 armed men on a standard rotation," Dorian said. "After tonight's meeting, it'll have more. Then we go before the rotation changes." Dorian looked at her. She looked back. "You're not going to the port," he said. "I can get into the control tower," she said. "Priya told me 3 days ago the files are in a digitized archive that's been uploaded to the port's internal server. The server is accessed from the control tower terminal. Someone who understands how to navigate a digital archive finds those files and broadcasts them publicly before anyone can erase them. She paused. I can do that faster than anyone you have. You don't have training for... I don't need training. Her voice was steady. I need 15 minutes with a terminal and a broadband connection. I've been managing my own digital archive since I was 19 years old because nobody in this industry does it for you. She held his eyes. You take the dock. I take the tower. He was quiet. The manor was quiet around them. The Atlantic below the cliffs was doing its patient thing. Priya, he said. How long to prep the federal package? 90 minutes, she said. I can transmit it to Marin while you're en route. He looked at Selene for another 3 seconds. You do not engage any personnel, he said. You do not attempt anything beyond the terminal. If the tower is occupied, when you reach it, you retreat immediately. Non-negotiable. Non-negotiable, she agreed. He picked up his phone. The convoy left St. Aurelius at 11:20. 2 black SUVs and a third vehicle, unmarked, carrying 4 additional men Dorian had called in from somewhere in the city. Selene was in the lead vehicle with Dorian, and the drive to Blackwater Port took 38 minutes through roads that were mostly empty at this hour, the industrial outskirts of the coastal region giving way to the flat geography of dock infrastructure, the smell of salt and diesel and cold water replacing the estate's clean air. Dorian spent the drive on a call she could only hear one side of, his voice doing the quiet operational thing, issuing coordinates and timing in shorthand she could only partially follow. He didn't look at her during the call. When it ended, he sat in silence for 2 minutes, then said, without preamble, Marin has accepted the package. Priya transmitted it 11 minutes ago. So it's live, she said. It's in federal space, he said. It needs a receiving agent to formally intake it. Marin has 90 minutes to make that call before her window closes. And if she doesn't, then we did this for nothing. He looked at the road. She will. How do you know? Because Lena liked her, he said. Before everything, they knew each other. Marin knew what happened, and she's been living with the knowing for 10 years, and that's its own kind of weight. Selene looked at the dark road. You think she's been waiting, she said. I think she's been waiting for something solid enough to act on without destroying her career. He paused. We gave her solid. The port emerged from the coastal dark as a geography of light and steel. Cargo cranes rising against the low clouds, container stacks visible as angular black shapes against the harbor's ambient glow, the water beyond them carrying the reflected light of a working industrial night. Even at this hour there was movement, the necessary activity of a commercial port that never fully slept. Dorian's driver killed the headlights a quarter-mile out, and they rolled the last stretch on the ambient light alone, pulling off the access road into a staging position behind a container stack that sat on the port's northern edge. They got out in the cold, and the smell of brine and diesel hit her full. Dorian's men moved with the specific efficiency of people who had done versions of this before. No words that weren't necessary. Equipment checked with the economy of long practice. She watched Dorian in the process and saw him shift in a way she'd only seen partially before. The operational thing at full engagement, the grief thing fully submerged now, the human thing stripped down to function. He checked something in his jacket, looked at her. The tower is the lit structure at the dock's eastern end, he said. 3-minute walk from your insertion point if you stay inside the container rows. The terminal you need is on the 2nd floor. The port's internal server is accessed through the supervisor's station, rightmost desk. The archive directory will be labeled by cargo manifest year. He paused. You're looking for manifests from the last 4 years. The relevant files are encoded under a secondary shipping company, Orion Coastal Logistics. They don't exist as a real company. Anything filed under that name is network traffic. How do I broadcast it? The supervisor's station has an external data port. Priya set up an upload protocol on this. He handed her a small drive, matte black, thumbnail-sized. Plug it in, press execute, it does the rest. Uploads directly to 7 journalists Priya has pre-contacted. They've been told to expect something and to publish immediately on receipt. She took the drive and looked at it, and then put it in the interior pocket of her jacket. 15 minutes, he said. 15 minutes, she agreed. If I'm not at your extraction point in 25, you leave with Priya's man. He'll be at the North Access Road. I know. I mean it, he said. I know you mean it, she said. He looked at her for one moment in the dark, and the port's ambient light and the cold, and the look had something in it she didn't try to name because there wasn't time. Then he moved. She moved in the opposite direction. The container rows were exactly what they were, industrial corridors of cold metal, their surfaces beaded with the port's ambient moisture, the spaces between them lit inconsistently, the ground underfoot a combination of concrete and gravel that required her to watch her footing. She moved fast, keeping low, using the container faces for cover as she navigated toward the eastern structure. The activity on the dock was concentrated at the main loading areas to the west. She could hear machinery and the occasional voice. And the eastern section was quieter, which was the point. She counted her steps. She heard the first gunshot when she was 90 seconds into the run. A flat, hard crack from the western dock, then immediately another, and then the particular quality of sound that happens when a firefight begins. Not chaotic, but multiple, overlapping, each source distinct. She kept moving. Dorian had said, "Don't stop." She'd said she wouldn't. She didn't. The control tower door was unlocked, which Dorian had told her it would be. Port infrastructure operated on the assumption that its security perimeter was its protection, not its internal locks. She took the stairs to the second floor 2 at a time and came into the supervisor's station at a run and stopped. The room was lit by monitor glow and functional fluorescence, and it was occupied. A man at the leftmost desk, middle-aged, in the kind of unremarkable clothing that meant he belonged here, a port supervisor or something with that function. He was already on his feet, already turned toward the door, already processing her presence with the specific alarm of someone who has just heard gunfire from the dock and is now looking at a person he doesn't recognize who has just run into his station. He reached for a phone on the desk. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not here for you," she said. "I'm not going to hurt you, and nobody is going to hurt you if you step away from the phone and sit down." "What the hell is—" "The shooting you just heard is on the west dock." She kept her voice level and direct. "It has nothing to do with you. Step away from the phone." He didn't step away from the phone. He picked it up. She crossed the room in 4 steps, and she wasn't trained, and she wasn't tactical, but she was fast, and she was decided, and she took the phone out of his hand with both of hers and set it on the desk and looked at him from a distance of approximately 2 feet. He was frightened. She could see it, the chest breathing, the white around the eyes. He wasn't going to fight her. He didn't have that in him, and she wasn't asking him to. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat down. She went to the rightmost desk. The supervisor's station terminal was exactly where Dorian had said it would be. She sat down, and the screen was active, some internal port management interface, and she navigated through it with the specific focus speed of someone who has spent years managing digital archives in environments where the systems were never designed with her in mind, and she'd had to learn them anyway. Cargo Manifest Archive, Directory Tree, Year tabs along the left margin. She found Orion Coastal Logistics in the first year's directory in under 90 seconds, 90 files. The second year had 112. The third had 140. The fourth, the most recent, had 203. She plugged the drive into the external port. From the dock below came the sound of something large impacting something else large. A vehicle, she thought, or equipment, one of the cranes, and the whole tower vibrated briefly with the resonance of it. The man at the other desk made a sound. "Stay seated," she said, without looking at him. The execute protocol loaded. She pressed it. Progress bar. Calculating. She watched the bar. From outside, closer now, on the tower's eastern side, she heard voices. 2 men, moving. Not port workers. The quality of the movement was different. She watched the bar. 11%. The voices stopped outside the tower's lower door. 22%. The door below opened. She heard footsteps on the stairs. She looked at the progress bar, and she looked at the door to the supervisor's station, and she looked at the man at the other desk who had gone completely rigid and was staring at the door with the expression of someone who has decided that stillness is the best available option. 38%. The door opened. The man who came through it was not a port worker. He was built the way Dorian's men were built, professionally, intentionally. And he was wearing a coat that was too heavy for the indoor temperature, and he had the specific immediate attention of someone entering a space they expect to find already controlled. He saw her. His hand moved toward the coat's interior. "Stop," she said. He didn't stop. She picked up the desk phone, Chan, the same phone she'd taken from the supervisor, and threw it at him. Not accurately. Accurately enough. It caught him across the forearm with enough impact to interrupt the movement, and in the 2 seconds that bought her, she was out of the chair and moving not toward the door, but sideways, behind the far bank of equipment, the server rack, and the secondary monitor station, because there was nowhere to go, and she knew it, but the 2 seconds were what mattered. 51%. He found his footing and came around the equipment bank, and she was already moving again, back toward the primary terminal, because the drive was in the terminal, and the progress bar was at 51%, and she was not leaving the terminal. He grabbed her. His hand closed on her jacket collar, and the impact of it against her body was total. She'd never been grabbed like this, with this specific force. And she went down onto one knee, and the jacket fabric held, and she twisted inside it, and her elbow connected with something on his arm, and his grip broke partly, and she got one hand on the terminal desk and pulled herself upright. 67%. He hit her. Not across the face, open-handed, across the side of the head, the kind of blow designed to disorient rather than damage. And it worked. The room going sideways for 2 full seconds while her inner ear recalibrated. She kept her hand on the desk. She kept standing. "Step away from the terminal," he said. "No," she said. He hit her again. Same place, harder. The room went sideways longer this time, and she tasted something copper, and her vision narrowed at the edges, and she thought very specifically and clearly, not yet. She stayed at the terminal, 79%. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the desk, and she grabbed the monitor edge with her free hand, and the monitor came with her, pulling the cable taut, and the cable held for 3 seconds, which was 3 seconds she needed. He wrenched her arm, and she let go of the monitor, and it snapped back, and she was clear of the desk. And he had both her arms now, and the desk was behind her, and the progress bar was not visible from this angle, and she could not see the screen. She heard the door again. New footsteps. Fast. The man holding her looked toward the door, and his grip shifted, not releasing but redistributing, preparing for something. And in the redistribution was a half second of reduced pressure on her left arm, and she drove her knee upward and connected with something that produced a specific sound from him, and his grip released entirely, and she was back at the terminal in 2 steps. 91%. Dorian came through the door. He had blood on his jacket, left shoulder, and his face had the specific compressed quality of someone running on very little margin, and the man who had been holding Selene turned toward him, and Dorian moved like the blackout in the Marrow Crown. Not fast exactly, precisely, the way something precise doesn't need to be fast. And the man went down in a way that was thorough and immediate. Selene watched the bar. 97, 98. The supervisor at the far desk had his hands flat on his desk and was staring at the ceiling with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has decided that what he cannot control, he will not attempt to influence. 99. 100. Upload complete. Transmitted to 7 recipients. She pulled the drive from the port. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this with a kind of distant observation. The shaking was fine. The shaking was what hands did. The drive was in her pocket and the upload was complete, and those were the facts that mattered. Dorian crossed the room to her and looked at her face, specifically at the side of her head where she'd been hit, and his expression did something that wasn't the composed thing. "I'm fine," she said. "You're bleeding." "A little." She pressed her fingers against her temple. They came away with a small amount of blood. "The upload is done. The files are transmitted." "I know," he said. "Priya confirmed receipt 12 seconds ago." He looked at her for another moment. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then walk." They went down the tower stairs and out into the port's cold air, and the dock was a different landscape than the one she'd walked into. The western section still sounding with the aftermath of whatever had happened there. 2 fires visible as orange light above the container stacks. sirens audible in the distance closing from multiple directions. Dorian's hand was on her elbow, not gripping, steadying, and they moved through the container rows toward the northern access road, and she could hear her own breathing in the cold, loud, and irregular, and she focused on regulating it because the body needed something to do. They came out of the container rows into open space, and she saw the SUVs, the north access road, Priya's man standing at the lead vehicle with the door open. 2 of Dorian's men were already there. A third was not. She looked at Dorian. "Carver," he said, and nothing else. She understood. She got in the vehicle. Dorian got in beside her and pulled the door, and the convoy moved immediately, and through the rear window she watched Blackwater Port recede. The cranes, the fires, the arriving emergency vehicles whose lights were beginning to pulse across the container stacks in alternating blue and red. And she thought about a man named Carver, whose face she had seen twice and whose name she had just learned, and who was not in the vehicle. She looked at Dorian. He was looking at his phone. His face was the composed thing. The shoulder wound had soaked through to the jacket's exterior in a circle the size of her palm. "Marin," he said, "she intake the package." He looked up from the phone. 40 minutes ago. It's in federal hands." Selene let out a breath. "And the broadcast," she said. "Priya's monitoring. 2 of the 7 journalists have already confirmed receipt. Publication is on their timeline now, and we don't control it." He set the phone down. "Earliest estimate is 2 hours." 2 hours. She looked out the window at the dark coastal highway. In 2 hours, 7 journalists would have access to 4 years of shipping manifests documenting a trafficking network's financial infrastructure, simultaneously with a federal evidence package that had been accepted by an agent with a personal reason to move on it. And Corbin Vex would know. And Senator Graves would know. And somewhere in the legal architecture of Blackline Entertainment, someone would be looking at a contract document with her signature on it and deciding how fast to file it. "The contract document," she said. "Priya's forensic challenge was transmitted with the federal package," Dorian said. "It's on record that the document exists and that we contest its validity. If they file it now, it lands in a context where the challenge is already established. It doesn't neutralize it." "No," he said. "It complicates it. That's what we have." She looked at her hands in her lap. The shaking had mostly stopped. The side of her head had a dull specific ache that would be worse by morning. "Graves will move," she said. "Not tonight. He's managing exposure. But tomorrow, once the publications hit—" "Yes," Dorian said. "What does he do?" Dorian was quiet for a moment. "He has 1 move left that changes the calculation significantly," he said carefully. She waited. "The information he claimed to have about Lena," Dorian said, "whether it's real or constructed, he'll use it. Not as a trade. That window is gone. As a weapon." He looked at the road. "If there's documentation that places Lena in the network in a way that implicates her participation rather than her victimization, and he releases it publicly, it destabilizes the investigation's origin narrative. It becomes a story about a crime lord using federal resources to avenge a criminal associate rather than a story about political corruption and trafficking. It makes your motivation look self-serving. It makes everything we built look like personal vendetta," he said, "which ends the investigation faster than any legal challenge." Selene looked at him. He was looking out the window and his jaw was set, and the shoulder wound was doing what wounds do when you stop moving and the cold gets into them. And she looked at his face in the highway's passing light, and she thought about 47 seconds of a degraded recording and 10 years of a structure built around a center that was grief wearing the clothes of justice. "Is it possible," she said carefully, "that the documentation he has about Lena is real? That there's something she did or was made to do that you don't know about?" A long silence. "Yes," he said, "it's possible. And if it is—" He turned to look at her. His eyes in the dark of the vehicle were the iron gray thing, and behind them was the question he had been not asking himself for 10 years, the one that lived underneath the structure and the evidence and the operational precision, the one that was still there at the bottom of everything when the 47 seconds ran out and the recording started again. "Then I'll deal with what's real," he said, "whatever it is." She held his eyes. She believed him. She didn't know if believing him was accurate, but she believed it anyway. Because the alternative was a version of this man that she was not equipped to account for, and she had 6 hours until morning, and the world was about to change in ways neither of them could fully control, and she needed something to hold on to that wasn't made of fear. The vehicle turned onto the coastal road toward St. Aurelius. Behind them, the city was beginning to do what cities do in the hour before dawn, the specific hush of a place that has not yet received news that will change it. In 2 hours, 7 journalists would open their secure uploads. In 3, the first publication would go live. In 4, Corbin Vex's phone would start receiving calls he couldn't deflect with a press statement. In 5, Senator Lucian Graves would be in a room with his legal team making decisions about what could be contained and what could not. In 6 hours, it would be morning, and the country would begin to read about things that had been happening in lit rooms and dark ports for 11 years. And the women whose names appeared in the shipping manifest filed under Orion Coastal Logistics would be one step closer to something that wasn't justice. Justice was the wrong word, too clean, too resolved, but something that was at least the beginning of a count. Selene pressed the drive in her jacket pocket. She pressed her fingers against the dull ache at her temple. She watched the Atlantic appear on the right side of the road as they approached the coast, invisible but present. The sound of it reaching her even through the vehicle's sealed windows, the perpetual indifferent motion of water that had been moving before any of this and would continue after. The convoy turned onto the private road. The gate opened, and somewhere ahead of them in St. Aurelius Manor, in the East Office, Priya was monitoring 7 screens and waiting for the first confirmation of publication, and the amber lights of the estate were visible through the trees like something that had decided to stay lit regardless of what the night had asked of it. And Selene Vale looked at those lights and felt the full weight of what was coming settle onto her. Not as dread, but as the specific gravity of a person who has stopped running and turned around and is now facing for the first time the thing they have been running from, and who has decided, with whatever is left of them after everything, that they are going to... The first publication went live at 4:53 in the morning. Priya said it aloud from the East Office doorway. Not loudly, not with the quality of announcement, just a statement of fact delivered into a room where 2 people were waiting for it. Selene was sitting at the long table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Dorian was standing at the window. Neither of them had slept. "Which outlet?" Dorian said. "Carver's contact at the Federal Beat Desk," Priya said. "He had it pre-written pending receipt. The moment the upload hit his secure server, he filed." She pushed her glasses up. "The manifests are public. Orion Coastal Logistics is public. Every cargo entry, every routing code, every date stamp." She paused. 6 of the 7 recipients have confirmed publication within the last 4 minutes. The 7th is holding for legal review, but they'll file by 6. Dorian said nothing. Selene looked at her cold tea. Carver's contact. She thought about that, the specific economics of it, the way a man's death generates a final usefulness. How Priya had said it without any visible weight, but with the particular precision of someone who understood exactly what she was saying and had chosen to say it that way because there was no better way. "Corbin knows," she said. It wasn't a question. "His communications team began a response cycle approximately 8 minutes ago," Priya said. "Counter-narrative preparation. They'll have a statement within the hour that positions Blackline as a victim of a coordinated criminal disinformation campaign." She tilted her head. "The statement is already written. They prepared it as a contingency." "Same as the hotel stories," Selene said. "Same playbook," Priya agreed. Selene stood up. The side of her head had the dull, specific ache of a bruise developing under the skin, and her body had the comprehensive tiredness of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 20 hours and had reached the far end of what adrenaline could sustain. She walked to the window and stood beside Dorian and looked at the Atlantic in the last dark before dawn. "Graves," she said. "He's been unreachable since the port," Dorian said. "His office communications have gone to staff routing. He's managed the night through intermediaries." He was quiet for a moment. "He'll make a statement by mid-morning. Strategic positioning, distance from Blackline, emphasis on his cooperative relationship with federal investigators, careful language that acknowledges nothing while appearing transparent." "Can he survive it?" she said. "Not the manifest," Dorian said. "His name appears in 4 routing authorizations under Orion's classification codes. Political protection has a paper trail if you know what you're looking for, and now 7 journalists and a federal intake officer know what they're looking for. He looked at the dark water. He'll have legal counsel presenting a plea framework to Marin's office before noon. Selene pressed her fingers carefully against her temple. "The contract document," she said. "He filed it," Priya said from the doorway. 40 minutes ago, through Blackline's legal entity directly to the federal docket." She paused. "Our forensic challenge is already on the same docket. The question is which one the intake agent weighs first." "Marin," Dorian said. "I've messaged her. She's aware." Priya looked at Selene. "The forensic document analyst I contacted is prepared to submit a preliminary finding within 6 hours. The backdating on Corbin's contract is detectable under standard metadata analysis. The document's creation timestamp predates the signature date by 11 days, which means it was constructed and then dated backward. That's a provable fabrication." 6 hours, Selene said. 6 hours. She looked at the horizon. The Atlantic was beginning to differentiate from the sky at its far edge. A thin line of something lighter, not dawn yet, the announcement of dawn. "And Reeves," she said. A silence. "Reeves left the city last night," Dorian said, after the meeting at the building. His phone went dark 2 hours later. He said this with the flatness that meant he had been not saying it since they left the port. "He knows we know. He's running." "Will he get far?" "No," Dorian said simply. She didn't ask what that meant in practical terms. She didn't need to. The first gray light of morning came off the ocean and found the manor's stone walls, and Selene stood at the window of the east office and understood that the night was ending and that what came next was not resolution. Resolution was the wrong word, too clean, too final, but reckoning, which was different, which was messier and slower and more expensive in ways that didn't become apparent until you were already paying them. At 7 in the morning, Corbin Vex called her phone. She was in the kitchen, having finally eaten something that wasn't cold tea, when the screen lit with a number she had deleted 3 times, and which her phone had stored anyway, the way phones store things you've tried to remove. She stared at it for 2 rings. Then she picked up. "You should have stayed in the bathroom," Corbin said. His voice was the flat voice, the one he used when he was done having conversations. She'd heard it hundreds of times in 3 years, and it had always functioned as a kind of gravity on her, pulling her toward compliance, toward the path of least resistance, toward the careful management of his displeasure. It didn't do that now. "Tell me something," she said. "The flowers in the conference room, when I signed, were those yours or the building's?" A silence. "What?" he said. "The first day. The conference room had flowers. I assumed they were for me. I want to know if you put them there." Another silence. She could hear him breathing. "You're making a mistake you cannot recover from," he said. "I made that mistake when I was 19 and I didn't know it," she said. "This isn't a mistake." "The contract document is a fabrication with a detectable timestamp and a forensic challenge already on federal record." She kept her voice even. "You built it as a contingency. I understand that. I understand you had the whole thing built before I walked into the Marrow Crown. I understand you planned for every version of this." She paused. "You didn't plan for me calling a dead man's number." He was quiet for a long moment. "The flowers were the buildings," he said. "I didn't put them there." She didn't know why he answered that. She didn't know why she'd asked it. But the answer settled something that had been sitting unresolved in her chest for 6 days. Something about the 19-year-old who had believed a room full of flowers was personal, was welcome, was the beginning of something that wanted her specifically. "Goodbye, Corbin," she said. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen of St. Aurelius Manor and looked at the phone in her hand and then set it face down on the table and finished her food. At 9:45, Senator Lucian Graves gave a brief statement outside his district office to a cluster of reporters who had been waiting since dawn. The statement lasted 4 minutes and contained the phrase "cooperative with all federal inquiries" 7 times, and the phrase "categorically deny" twice, and the phrase at this time 11 times, which was the specific language of a man who understood that what he said today would be parsed by people who knew how to parse it, and was constructing each sentence to have the maximum possible number of escape routes. Priya played the footage on her monitor and wrote 3 words on a notepad. "Plea by Thursday." At 10:15, 3 federal agents arrived at Blackline Entertainment's primary offices. No announcement. They entered carrying documentation and requested access to the company's financial servers, which was a request that carried the specific weight of requests that are not actually requests. Selene watched this on a news feed on Priya's secondary monitor. A journalist had been positioned outside the building, apparently pre-tipped, and filmed the agents entering. The footage was 30 seconds long and had been viewed 400,000 times in the 40 minutes since its publication. At 11, Priya received confirmation from the forensic document analyst. She came to find Selene in the East office, where Selene had been sitting for the past hour, doing the specific nothing of a person whose body has finally stopped and refused to restart without proper rest. The backdating finding is submitted, Priya said. Metadata confirms an 11-day construction window prior to the signature date. The analyst flagged 3 additional fabricated elements in the consent language itself. Structural inconsistencies with standard entertainment contract syntax of the period it claims to be from. She set a printed summary on the table. The document is dead. Selene looked at the summary. How long until Marin acts on it? She said. She already has, Priya said. The contract document has been withdrawn from the federal docket on the intake agent's determination of potential fabrication. It will be investigated as an evidence of obstruction. Priya paused. Your testimony is clean. Selene looked at her own hands on the table. Her testimony was clean. The words sat in the air of the East office, and she tried to feel what they meant and found she was too tired to feel anything large, only the small specific thing of a weight that had been sitting on a specific point of her body since Dorian told her in a service alley and had now shifted, not gone, but no longer compressing. She looked up at Priya. Thank you, she said. Priya pushed her glasses up and looked at her screen. The analyst did the work, she said, which was Priya's version of you're welcome. Dorian came back at 2 in the afternoon. He had been gone since 10. He'd left without explanation, which Selene had come to understand was not discourtesy, but the particular habit of a man who had spent 10 years in a structure where explaining movements was a liability. Priya had told her where he'd gone when she'd asked, which meant Priya had decided she deserved to know. To meet Marin in person, at a location outside federal facilities, to provide supplementary testimony regarding the investigation's origin and the evidence chain's integrity. He came into the East office still wearing the jacket from last night. The shoulder wound had been dealt with. She could see the outline of dressing beneath the fabric, but the jacket itself still bore the stain, dried now and darker. He set something on the table, a folder, physical, manila, the kind that held actual paper. He sat down across from her. Marin, he said. She had been holding documentation independently for 4 years, evidence she'd gathered in her own capacity but couldn't act on without institutional support. He looked at the folder, including documentation related to Lena. Selene looked at the folder. What does it say? She said. He put his hand flat on the folder, not opening it, just the hand, pressed down, as if feeling the weight of the paper inside through the cover. Lena tried to get out of the network in its 2nd year, he said. She had collected documentation on her own, recordings, written records, the names of 6 clients. She passed the documentation to a man she trusted inside Marin's department. He paused. The man was connected to Graves' protection structure. He passed Lena's information to Corbin Vex within 48 hours of receiving it. Selene said nothing. She was dead within 2 weeks of that, Dorian said. The East office was very quiet. Outside, the Atlantic continued its business. A gull called once, far away. The afternoon light through the windows was the thin coastal light of a clear, cold day, and it fell across the table and across the folder under Dorian's hand and across his face, which was doing something she had not seen it do in 6 days of watching it closely. Not the composed thing, not the grief thing in its usual compressed form. Something that was both of those at once and also something newer. The specific expression of a person who has received the answer to the question they've been asking for 10 years and has discovered that the answer is exactly as terrible as they feared and also, somehow, survivable. She tried, Selene said. She tried, he said. She did everything right. She was careful, and she documented, and she found the right channel, and the channel was wrong. He looked at the window. That's what happened. A silence. Where is she? Selene said carefully. He opened the folder. Inside were several documents and a single photograph. A coastal location, a modest marker, the kind of place that exists at the edge of land and water in the way that some places exist specifically for the people who need them. Marin found the burial record 18 months ago, he said. She was waiting for a context in which revealing it wouldn't endanger an ongoing investigation. He looked at the photograph. She's on the coast, about 40 miles from here. Selene looked at the photograph. She thought about the 47 seconds, the degraded recording, the laugh that broke at the edges. When will you go? She said. Tomorrow, he said. After the initial federal processing is complete and I've given everything I need to give. He closed the folder. I'll go tomorrow. She looked at his face. She thought about what it meant to have built 10 years of your life around a question and to have arrived at the answer and to still have to wait until tomorrow because the machinery of accountability needed feeding first. I'll go with you, she said, if you want. He looked at her. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the room. The particular quality of late autumn coastal light that makes the interior of a stone building feel both exposed and sheltered simultaneously, like being inside something that knows about weather. Yes, he said. That was all. But it was the first time in 6 days that he had said yes to something that wasn't operational. The next 72 hours were the machinery. Selene gave formal testimony to federal investigators on the first day. 7 hours, 2 agents, a court reporter, the full account of every event she had attended, every name she could provide, every conversation she had witnessed or partially overheard. The agents were professional and thorough and treated her testimony with the careful attention of people who understood its value and also understood its vulnerabilities and were building around both. The forensic document finding was formally entered into the record on the second morning. Corbin Vex's attorney arrived at the federal building at 2 in the afternoon of the same day with a document that was not a denial. Corbin himself was arrested on the third morning. Selene heard about it from Priya, who reported it the way she reported everything, as a data point, accurate and unembellished. But when Priya turned back to her screen, there was something briefly visible in her expression that was not professional neutrality, something that lasted approximately 1 second, and was the closest thing to satisfaction she apparently permitted herself. The arrests began to accumulate after that with the specific momentum of a structure that has had its keystone removed. 2 of the political tier clients named in the manifests were in federal custody by the end of the week. A third, a financier whose name Selene recognized from business coverage, turned himself in through his attorney with a cooperation agreement already drafted. Senator Lucien Graves did not give himself up voluntarily. His arrest came on the 5th day, at his district residence early in the morning, in the presence of 3 federal agents and a representative of the state attorney general's office. The footage of it, captured by a journalist who had been parked outside the residence since the previous evening on a tip from Marin's department, ran on every national broadcast within an hour. Selene watched it on a laptop in the kitchen of St. Aurelius Manor, alone, with coffee that was actually hot this time. Graves looked smaller in the footage than he had in the conference room building. He walked out of his residence with his coat not fully buttoned and his silver hair less arranged than it had been in every public image she had ever seen of him, and the specific quality of his diminishment was not satisfying in the way she had expected it might be. It was just true. Just the accurate size of a man who had been operating at an inflated scale for 40 years and had run out of the infrastructure that made the inflation possible. She closed the laptop. She sat with her coffee and she thought about the women in the shipping manifests. Not the names she knew, not herself, not the woman in Chicago who had grabbed her wrist, but the ones she didn't know. The entries that were routing codes rather than names. The women who had moved through the network as cargo-adjacent logistics and whose faces were not in any photograph that would be published alongside the arrests. The ones who were somewhere today, waking up to a morning that had not yet changed for them, who would not know for days or weeks or months that the infrastructure that had held them had begun to collapse. She thought about the slowness of institutional change, the gap between a network dismantled in evidence and a life actually freed. She thought about what she wanted to do with what came next. She had no contract, no manager, no label, no agency, no professional infrastructure of any kind. She had debt that the collapse of Blackline Entertainment's legal standing would not automatically resolve. She had a public image that was in the specific transitional state of a narrative being rewritten. The overnight meltdown story being replaced by a different story, one where she was a word she was not yet comfortable wearing. Survivor. The journalist kept using it, and she understood why, and she was not sure it was wrong, but she was not sure it was the whole thing either. She had a voice. She had always had a voice. It was the thing they had originally wanted before they found other uses for her, and it was still there. She had checked, in the way performers check privately, in the echo of a stone-walled room late at night when the Atlantic was audible through the window and no one was watching. Still there. A little rougher than it used to be. A little less careful. She thought that might be better. On the morning of the 6th day, she and Dorian drove north along the coast. He drove himself, which she hadn't seen him do before. Always a driver, always the back seat. The vehicle was the same black SUV but without the additional men. Just the two of them and the coastal highway and the morning light off the water coming in at a low angle that made everything specific and clear-edged. They didn't talk much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the things there were to say were the kind that needed to be said slowly, over time. And they were both people who had learned, through different experiences and with different costs, that the slow things lose something when you force them into a pace they weren't built for. She watched the coast. He watched the road. Once, when the highway curved and the ocean came into full view on their right, a wide gray-blue expanse under a sky that had decided to be clear and cold and almost unbearably present. He said, without preamble, "She would have liked you." Selene looked at the water. "Why?" she said. "Because you went back to the terminal," he said. She always went back. Selene pressed her palm flat against the cold window glass and felt the vibration of the road through it. "Was she funny?" she said. A pause. "Very," he said. And something in the word had a different quality than anything she had heard from him in 6 days. Lighter, briefly, like something underground catching air. They reached the coastal location at 9:40 in the morning. It was a small place at the edge of a bluff, where the land ended in a gradual slope to rocky beach rather than a cliff. There was a stand of wind-shaped trees behind it, and the ocean in front of it, and the sky above it, and the particular quality of light that exists at places where elements meet, the junction of land and water and air, making something that is not quite any of those three individually. Dorian got out of the vehicle and stood at the edge of the bluff for a long time. Selene stayed by the vehicle. She stayed there because this was his and not hers, and because she understood the difference between being with someone and being inside their private moment, and because some distances are not a failure of closeness, but a form of respect. She watched the ocean. She listened to the wind in the shaped trees and the sound of the water on the rocks below, and she let the cold do what cold does, which is clarify. After a while, she didn't count the minutes, Dorian came back. He stood beside her at the vehicle and looked at the water for another moment, and then he said, "She used to record voice memos to herself when she was working through a piece. Musical annotation. I found one where she was working on a passage she kept getting wrong, and she said to herself, out loud, just talking to herself on the recording, she said, 'It's not a mistake, it's an unresolved phrase, just let it find the next note.'" He paused. "I've thought about that for 10 years. Selene looked at him. "Did it find the next note?" she said. He looked at the ocean. "Yeah," he said. "I think it did." They drove back south in the late morning, and the light had changed to the warmer angle of midday, and the highway was more populated than it had been at 9, and the radio came on when he started the engine, some station playing something low and instrumental that neither of them changed. She thought about the jazz club that existed in the outline's ending, the New Orleans version, the amber light, the pianist stopping. She thought about the tidiness of it, the narrative convenience, the way stories want to resolve into a single image that carries everything. She thought that life was not like that. She thought that what she and Dorian Saint had was not a jazz club ending. It was two people in a vehicle on a coastal highway, on a clear, cold morning, neither of them the same as they had been 8 days ago, both of them carrying the specific weight of everything they'd done and everything they hadn't been able to prevent, driving back toward a manor where Priya was monitoring the ongoing dismantlement of a network that would not be fully dismantled in their lifetimes, in a country that was beginning to understand something it had been helped not to see for 11 years. That was not a clean image, but it was true, and she had decided, somewhere between a bathroom stall and a port tower and a bluff above a rocky beach, that she was done with the untrue. She looked at Dorian's profile against the moving coastal light. "After this is done," she said, "whatever done looks like, what do you do?" He thought about it. Genuinely, without the operational speed, the slow consideration of someone accessing a question he hadn't looked at in a long time. "I don't know," he said. "I've been thinking forward to this for 10 years. I don't have anything behind it." "That's terrifying," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I'm going to make music," she said. I don't know what kind yet, different than before." She paused. "I might be terrible." "You won't be," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But you went back to the terminal." She looked at the road. She thought about the 19-year-old in the conference room, the flowers that had been the building's and not hers, the signature on a page she hadn't read closely enough. She thought about all the versions of herself between that girl and this woman in this vehicle, the various survivals and accommodations and quiet capitulations that had added up to someone she hadn't exactly chosen to become. She thought that she was going to choose now, not dramatically, not with the momentum of a climax, just the ongoing daily choosing of a person who has stopped waiting for someone to tell her who she is. The coastal highway curved south, and the ocean fell back on their right, and the city appeared on the horizon as a low suggestion of density against the sky, and Selene Vale sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV on a clear, cold morning and looked at the city coming toward her and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was going toward it rather than being carried. St. Aurelius came into view from the coastal road at 12:47. The gate opened without a visible mechanism, the same as it always had. The amber lights were on in the daytime, the same way they had been on in the dark. Dorian pulled into the motor court and stopped the engine, and they sat for a moment in the specific quiet of a vehicle that has just stopped moving after a long drive, the engine ticking as it cooled. "No bodyguards," Dorian said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the almost expression, the closest thing to a smile his face had produced in 6 days, which was not much and was also somehow exactly right. "You tracked my phone once," she said. "Figured you'd find me anyway." He looked at the manor's stone face in the midday light. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I would have." They got out of the vehicle. The Atlantic was audible from the motor court, not loudly, at this distance, just present. The sound of water that has been moving for longer than anything in its vicinity and will continue moving after everything currently on the shore has been resolved or abandoned or simply worn smooth enough to stop catching on anything. Selene walked toward the manor door. Behind her, she heard Dorian's footsteps on the gravel, steady and unhurried, and then the sound of the door opening and the light from inside the manor reaching out across the threshold to meet the clear, cold light of the afternoon. She stepped through, and for the first time since she had stood in a hotel bathroom with cracked lipstick and a dead man's phone number and a future she could not see the shape of, the door closed behind her without feeling like a trap. It felt like a choice, which was different, which was, for now, enough.